Welcome back to Bible Brats and Brew with Brandon and Greg. In today's episode, we're going to cover a little bit of chapter 3 of Exodus and chapter 4 with a slight recap of what we covered in the first two episodes of chapters 1 and 2. So we thank you for joining us here again on Bible Brats and Brew, just learning a little bit more about God's truth and what the Exodus story is all about. And we look forward to sharing our thoughts on some brats, which were delicious, and some brew. Again, delicious. So thank you again for joining in on this journey with Brandon and I. Well, thank you again for joining both Brandon and I on this unique journey of learning more about the Bible and enjoying some brats and some brew. So, Brandon, you want to give a brief overview about chapter 1 and 2, just real brief so we can get on to 3 and 4?
Yeah, well, the Hebrews, the Israelites, are in Egypt, and they're being persecuted by Pharaoh, who is opposing God's work in their lives. They are enslaved. There was attempts at genocide, and Moses, through God's intervention through other people, has been put into Pharaoh's family, rescued out of the Nile.
Right.
And so we left him off as a baby. We're going to cover him now as an adult, and we're going to encounter a little bit of burning bush and a little bit beyond that. And so this is a pretty pivotal moment in Exodus. I'm really excited to cover it. But before we crack open the Bibles, we need to crack open our brews. But what are you drinking?
I got a North Coast Old Rasputin Russian Imperial Stout. Know nothing about it. Don't care that it's from Russia. But I tell you what, it is full of flavor. I can tell you that.
All right. I'm excited to hear what you think about that at the end of this. But I have myself, I picked something because we had fire. This is going to be talking about. So I picked something that says Fire Brewed Craft Soda. This is a Sprecher root beer, fire brewed. It says made with real honey. So it looks like it has some pretty good ingredients. The little flavor text on the back talks about how they have all of these aromatic botanicals and homemade gas-fired brew. It sounds very fancy. So I've never had this before. I'm excited to try it.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear what you think about it. The logo on it's cool. I mean, the can looks cool too.
Looks pretty sweet. And the brats. I can't pronounce the name. I couldn't pronounce the name of this soda. I definitely can't pronounce the name of the brats.
Do your best.
I'm going to offend all of the German listeners. It's pretty cool, though. This is actually brats that have wild rice that's inside it. So I was really excited to try these. And so we're going to hear about what we thought about those right at the end after we crack open the Bible. But it's ready. You have yours in the glass, but I'm going to crack open my root beer.
Yeah, let's hear the crack. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there we go.
That's kind of a cool sound, isn't it? That.
All right. So we need to cover basically the rest of chapter 2 that we kind of left off.
Sure. You wanna cover that? Or?
Yeah. So we'll just summarize it.
Okay.
So he grew up and he sees an Egyptian that's striking one of the Hebrews, one of his brothers. And so he strikes him, the Egyptian, dead. The very next day, Moses sees two Israelites that are fighting with each other. He intervenes saying, "Hey, why are you striking your companion?" And then the companion says, "Well, who's made you judge? Are you going to strike me dead like you strike the Egyptian dead?" And so Moses, realizing that the secret got out because he killed this Egyptian in secret. He even talks about he looks both ways to make sure no one's watching. He hides the body in the sand, but his secret is out. Pharaoh wants to kill him, and so he flees Egypt, and he goes over and he rescues his future wife at a well. Point of application, if you're single like me, apparently go to wells because that's a very popular place to meet wives in Genesis and Exodus.
I'm gonna be looking for a well for you now.
Third time's a charm. Third time this has happened, but he gets married. He makes this new family. He has a son who you can try to pronounce that name. It's in verse 22. And you say
I don't know if I.
It starts with a
Gershom.
G. It's
Gershom.
what a beautiful name.
Gershom. What a
Consider
beautiful
that
name.
for your babies.
Gershom.
But yeah,
I'm gonna start taking you to a well, just so you know. Brandon's my brother-in-law too.
Yeah.
So I'd love to go to his wedding.
Yeah, there you go. That's a long ways off. I haven't gone to a well recently. But all that to say, we have here his son's name is kind of a reference to the fact that he's a foreigner in a land. And so while he has a new family, he kind of like is trapped between two different worlds. He grew up as an Egyptian, but he wasn't an Egyptian. He rejects the wrong that they're doing against his people. But then he wasn't really accepted by the Hebrews either. And so we see that he wanted to make a difference. He wants to has this ambition to rescue his people, that very hot-headedness. But the end result of that is that he killed someone, he murdered them, and then he had to flee. And so he is at this point of the story just sort of probably have accepted the fact that he doesn't belong anywhere. That's why he calls his son. Because of the name of his son, he's referencing the fact that he's a foreigner. He doesn't belong
Gershom,
anywhere.
right? And that's that first part of Gershom, the G-E-R, ger. It's actually Hebrew for sojourner, and you see that right at the end, right?
Yeah.
And that's a temporary inhabitant or newcomer to a land. So that's really cool that, it parallels itself, and it just shows you.
So that's where we left off. And so we're going to go into chapter 3 now, and we're going to read through it, and we're going to discover some pretty cool things, I think. So I'll go ahead and start us off, and then we can pause every so often and talk about it. So, verse 1 of chapter 3. Now Moses was pasturing the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire from the midst of bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, yet the bush was not consumed. So Moses said, I must turn aside now and see this marvelous sight, why the bush is not burned up. When the Lord said that saw that he had turned aside to look, God called to him from the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here I am. Then he said, Do not come near here. Remove your sandals from your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. He said also, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Then Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a good place to stop and just ask a couple questions here. Well, number one, Horeb, the mountain of God. That's a pretty special place. Horeb in Hebrew is desert, right? That's what its meaning is desert, which is another name for Mount Sinai, if I'm thinking of this correctly, which is where God's about to give Moses the laws on the tablets, right?
He's got to come back to the mountain. Yeah, this very a lone place, this very wilderness place.
Very lone, yep. That's why it's desert, Horeb, desert. I think it's actually pronounced Korev in Hebrew.
I'll take your word for it. I can't pronounce anything.
So I think it's really unique that, for some very big specific moments with God, it requires us to be alone with him, not around a bunch of people. Community's great and everything, but sometimes we gotta get alone with God.
Yeah, no, I think
right?
I think silence and solitude is a spiritual discipline that people can practice. Jesus went off alone many times.
Yes, he did. Absolutely,
alone to commune with God.
Yep.
Both wilderness and also just along the side of a lake. Or on a hill. And so, yeah, absolutely. I think a couple things that stand out to me is that he took off his sandals. That was very common, ancient Near Eastern practice. That if the ground is holy, you don't wear shoes. And it was really funny to think, because when they entered into the temples, the priests took off their shoes because they're not supposed to bring impurities into the temple area.
Right.
And so I'm just thinking in our present day context, it'd be really funny to see pastors just walking around without any shoes.
It might do us all good though.
Yeah.
to see it.
But yeah, no, if your pastor's any listening, it's a biblical idea, I guess.
Yeah, dare you to take off your shoes, go to the pulpit.
There's a correct response when coming to God.
Take you out for lunch for that one.
There's a correct response when it comes to approaching God.
Absolutely.
And so this is reverent. This is the fact that God is appearing in and through this bush. Now, it doesn't mean that God's full presence is contained in this. God is everywhere. But the fact that the fullness of God, a glimpse of that is being seen directly right now. And so Moses recognizes that this angel, this messenger of God is God himself portraying himself. And as a result, he needs to respond correctly. He needs to respond with humility and recognizing his position compared to God.
Right. You know what's really interesting when we're talking about the burning bush too, is yes, God's presence is there. It's burning in the bush, and the bush is consumed with the presence, but the bush is never harmed at all. And one of the Hebrew words for that is Baar. So it's kind of an inversion of one of the evil names in Scripture, right? Baal or Baal, however you pronounce it. But Baar is to consume without causing infliction, which really gives some more depth to this whole burning bush, that God can consume anything. His presence can be there without actually inflicting harm against it, but actually to edify it. So I think that's a really interesting thing too, like when we're looking at the burning bush and then Moses being right there and wanting to be in such a prostrate position to acknowledge the holiness of God, right? And
and just like a personal note, Moses got to be real confused because he's exited the important scene. We know that he's about 80 years old at this point in the story when he first confronts Pharaoh. And so traditionally, Stephen in Acts 7 describes the fact that Moses lived 40 years in Egypt, and then he had to flee, and then he lived 40 years here.
Yep.
That's tradition, but what Stephen believed in Acts 7. But regardless, he has lived a very long life.
He has.
And he's certainly accepted the fact that he is not part of Pharaoh's family. He's disconnected from his people. He's made the most of what he had. And the fact that God, the God of his fathers, this amazing story that was being tracked in Genesis is going to continue on with him. I'd be pretty shocked if I was him.
Right.
But we can probably... Yep.
What would you think if you saw a burning bush?
Well, I'm drinking root beer, so I'd be confused. There's not an easy explanation. But
I mean, really, you would just be in awe, right? I mean, that's what the whole thing is that, could you imagine Moses? He's just in awe at this moment of, whoa, God is here right now. What do I do?
All right. Well, we definitely need to continue. We got a big conversation for them to talk about. So, continuing on in verse 7, and the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have been given heed to their cry because of their taskmasters. For I am aware of their suffering. So I have come down to deliver them from the power of the Egyptians, and to bring them up from that land to a good and spacious land, to a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites and the Hittite and the Amorite and the Lozites, the Hivites and the Jubites. And now, behold, the cry of the sons of Israel have come to me. Furthermore, I have seen the oppression with which the Egyptians are oppressing them. Therefore, come now, and I will send you to Pharaoh, so that you may bring my people, the son of Israel, out of Egypt. So we see God's intention. God explains to Moses his intention, that he is going to make sure to fulfill those covenant oaths, the covenant promises that he gave to his ancestors, that they're going to inherit this land. That was an important part of the covenant, that they were going to be a blessing to nations, that there were going to be many descendants that numbered the stars, and they're going to be in possession of this land. And so God is sharing his intention that he will do that they will go from this position of suffering to a place full of milk and honey. Right.
Because in a land of milk and honey, there's no oppression, right?
Yeah, no,
And
it's prosperous.
it's
Milk
prosperous,
is the
nourishing.
height of animal husbandry, and the honey here. This is what I learned recently. It's not referencing bees, honey. It's referencing sweet syrup that
Yep,
is
from a
made from
flower.
plants, like dates, probably.
Right.
Could
That's
be,
what John the Baptist, when they say milk and honey, he was out eating milk and honey, or sorry, honey and locusts. They're referring to the plants, not an actual.
dates. So I don't know what the sweet syrup tastes like. It's probably a little different than the root beer I'm drinking, but
We're gonna have to find out. We're gonna have to find one of them plants and figure this out.
But all that to say, he wants to bring them into prosperity. And Moses, this is what he wanted. He wanted his people to be freed. That's why he struck down an Egyptian. That's why he tried to protect the fellow Israelite from another Israelite. And so he's probably all for this. But then suddenly, at the very last verse, it says, "I will send you." Moses is like, "Wait a second, this is not a part of the plan." And so it says in verse 11, "But Moses said to God, 'Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh, and I should bring the sons of Israel out of Egypt?'" Like, valid question. And these kind of meeting with God, they have a typical structure that they see God's presence, they respond out of fear or reverence, and then when they hear God's mission for them, they immediately say, and they have some amount of protest, that they have concerns, and then God addresses those concerns, and they go back and forth until God's way happens.
So do you think this is because Moses is looking at his own strength and not what the strength of God is?
There's a lack of faith in because of the circumstances that he's in. He was powerless before.
Right.
He
absolutely.
could not. He tried multiple times in Egypt on those 2-day stretch to liberate his people, in that sense that he wanted to be the leader of them. He had that ambition, but he couldn't do it of his own strength. And so he's looking at the fact that he's lived 80 years, mostly as a shepherd, and he doesn't have any power to do this.
He oppresses himself.
Send someone else. Why would you send me? Is a valid question in his mind.
It is. And you know what? I think all of us would be there too. And you know what? He's oppressing himself. I think in Hebrew it's called lahadis or lakatis. I think it's lakatis, which is oppression. And you can do that to yourself. It's making yourself the object of the whole issue of distress. And I think it's lakatis is how you say it. And forgive me if that's wrong. Pronunciation.
Anything that we say when it comes to pronunciation, just ignore it.
Yeah. But I mean, I just want to show the depth of what Moses was going through, because I think we all go through that every day, because we could all have an assigned task, to make this real practical. We could all have an assigned task at work, and we could get, our superiors come to us and say, "Hey, we need you to do this." We say, "Hey, no, hold on. There's no way I could do that. I'm not qualified. I'm not trained in that. I don't know anything about it." Well, the truth of the matter of the fact is that, you know what? Place your trust in God, and he's going to help you. He's going to give you guidance and wisdom if you submit it to him, right? If you try to do it on your own strength, no, it's going to fail. But if you go to him first, well, then all of a sudden we're going to get some knowledge, some wisdom.
Yeah, we get that in verse 12, like when God responds. So the classic structure, Moses presents this issue, this concern. He can't go. Who is he to go? And then and God said, "Certainly I will be with you, and this shall be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall worship God at this mountain." And so God says, "I will be with you." What an amazing, powerful promise. That's something that God demonstrated his faithfulness in the ups and downs of his ancestors there, where Abraham and Jacob, they kept on, Isaac, they kept on breaking God's instructions, but then they would turn to him, and they had a lot of ups and downs in their faiths. But yet, through it was a constant of God being there. And so God promises Moses that same thing, that I will be there with you, and this will be the sign. You will, when you come back to this mountain to worship me, you will see that I have been with you the whole time. And this is interesting, because this is a sign that will be only revealed once Moses steps out in faith. After he's acted out in faith, he will see that God has been faithful all along.
Right.
And we see that that's not quite the sign that Moses would be looking for. It says in verse 13, "Then Moses said to God, 'Behold, I'm going to the sons of Israel, and I shall say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you. Now they may say to me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? And so he still has concerns. Will they believe me about who's sending me? And so God says, and God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, thus you shall say to the sons of Israel, I am has sent me to you. And God furthermore said to Moses, thus you shall say to the sons of Israel, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and this is my memorial name for all generations. And so he gives them a little bit more instructions where he's supposed to say to the elders that the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob has appeared to me, saying, I am indeed concerned about you and has done to you what has been done to you in Egypt. And so we get some instructions of what he is to say. So I'm going to skip a little bit of that instructions and go to in verse 19. And it's verse 18, actually. And they will pay heed to what you say, the elders, and you with the elders of Israel will come to the king of Egypt, and you will say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. So now, please, let us go on a 3-day journey into the wilderness, and we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. But I know that the king of Egypt will not permit you to go, except under compulsion. So I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all of my miracles with which I shall do in the midst of it. And after that he will let you go. And I will grant this people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, and so it shall be where you go, and you will not go empty-handed. But every woman shall ask of her neighbor and the woman who lives in her house articles of silver and articles of gold and clothing, and you will put them on the sons and daughters. Thus you will plunder the Egyptians. And so, to summarize here, God, 2 parts. God says, I am who I am. That is my name. And then the second part, all of those verses that we just read, was basically God is telling Moses in advance that this is what's going to happen. You're going to ask Moses you're going to ask Pharaoh to go out to worship God for 3 days. Pharaoh will deny. Pharaoh will be forced to do that. God is going to strike out against Pharaoh and Egypt in justice. And as a result, the Egyptians who were enslaving the Hebrews are going to be giving them gold and silver happily to see them gone.
Right.
And so there's a couple of things to talk about. Yahweh. What do you got to say about Yahweh? This is a pretty important name.
Yahweh. You know, when you pronounce it, Yahweh, it's supposed to sound like a breath, which comes down to an original word called the Ruach, which is God's breath. And that's where we get so scripture in 2 Timothy, God's word being the inspired word, given to human authors, right? But Yahweh is a name beyond all comprehension. It is a name so big that nothing could ever conquer it. Nothing could ever touch it. It expands across all horizons, not of just the earth, but of the universe, of all creation. It is the very breath of God that holds everything together.
Yeah, so that name Yahweh is coming from the infinitive to be.
Yep.
That I am who I am. That is what Yahweh means, that he has an unchanging nature, that all of these changes are happening to Moses. All of these changes happen to God's people and the Egyptians. And despite all of the change, God is consistent, that he is faithful. Because the root of his question is not that is that he won't be believed, that he won't have God at his side, but God is reaffirming that I will be with you. I am unchanging, and I will be who I always will be. I am who I am, that I am God, that I am loving and faithful and trusting, and all of these things I always am.
And his breath is never changing, right? His breath is eternal. It's the only eternal breath that can give life, which is really cool.
So, yeah, all the times in your English translations, you probably see Lord capitalized. It's reference to Yahweh.
Yahweh,
and so this is this unchanging nature of who God is. That he is who he is, always will be, always was. And so we see then he recaps what's going to happen. But I think that we need to start transitioning to part 2, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. So, really reflect on what the name of Yahweh really entails. And just spend some time in this third chapter of Exodus. Think about Yahweh, the name, who God is, his character, his reputation, his virtue, and just spend time in his presence as you go through chapter 3 of Exodus.
Yeah, but
right?
we're going to be continuing right away into chapter 4. So we can go to part 2. They'll be published at the same time. And so we're going to cover chapter 4. We're going to cover like applications, and most importantly, we can't leave people without the review of the brew, the brats and brew. So
I know.
We'll have to you'll have to go right to part 2 right after we finish it.
Yeah, we'll do that. So what we'll do with part 2, we'll give you the reviews of the brats and brews over there, because this chapter 3 and then Brandon bringing up the word Yahweh is so intentional and so deep and reflective that it's actually transformational to really think about the name Yahweh. So I really want people to focus on that too. But since we're going to go to part 2, I just want to thank everybody again for joining us on episode 2, part 1. So I thank you, and we'll tell you more about the brats and the brew too in part 2.
Sorry to leave you on the cliffhanger.
But we got it, because you know what? They're pretty delicious. So again, thank you so much. And be praying for Brandon and I. We'll be praying for all of you guys too. We're doing this for the Lord, not for our own selves. And just thank you for joining us on this cool little journey that's pretty unique. So have some fun with it. But spend time in the Word. Get to know your Lord and Savior. Thank you.